Henry Corbin's Cat, a short story. We had been interrupted twice already, the first time by a phone call and the second when Mrs. Greyland neglected to put on the kettle and was flustered for lack of tea. I was trying to conduct an interview. I'd prepared a list of questions. I was impatient. The assignment was tedious. There were juicy stories to be reported. My editor had me interviewing a tiresome old woman who, I thought unkindly, was batty. I had never heard of her. She'd written a book, or a few, and was semi-famous in her field, which field was something like Persian mysticism. Her book was in a new edition, but she was dottery, long retired. I hadn't got past the first question. When did you first become interested in Persian mysticism? More interesting was her house. It was a great piece of real estate. It was old, solid, well-built, with Georgian features, but it was wasting away. It was in dire need of renovation. It was dusty with books and a collection of odd furnishings, none of them matching. The air was heavy with a perfume. The whole house reeked of some Persian perfume. At this third interruption, the old woman sat up startled, lifted her neck, and gazed out through the window. Then she leapt to her feet. "He's back!" she exclaimed. She had just then, in a broken and roundabout answer to my first question, been relating how, when she was young, she had met a Stella Corbin in Switzerland one year, Stella Corbin being the wife of Henry Corbin, the French scholar. I'd never heard of him either, or his wife. If Emily Greyland was minorly famous in her field, Henry Corbin was properly famous, a reputed giant. He had a long Wikipedia page. Mrs. Greyland was one of those who claimed to understand what he was on about. She described him as the philosopher of imagination, but how this placed her among academic royalty I couldn't ascertain. I suppose I was short or huffy, and I was hoping she would get to the point. But then she leapt to her feet, declaring, "He's back," and rushed to the door. This interruption concerned a cat. She had just spied it in the garden through the window. Its arrival sent her into an immediate lather of excitement. I heard her calling, coaxing the cat indoors. A cat sauntered in, as nonchalant as a cat. It was a distinctive cat. I have no idea of breeds or pedigrees, except to say that it was not the usual moggy. It was larger, more regal, more heavy-set, with a long, curious tail, a mix, I would say, of several exotic types of cat. In tone it was the colour of tobacco, but its distinguishing feature was a black eye patch, pirate-like, around its left eye. Mrs. Greyland was delighted beyond measure that the cat had come back. "He went missing?" I asked. "Esquire," she said, announcing the cat's name. "He comes and goes." She hurried to fetch him a treat from the back room. The cat, for his part, walked in like a celebrity walking down the red carpet, then stopped and surveyed the room. Eventually Mrs. Greyland sat back down, saying, "Oh, I'm so pleased." Where were we? "You're explaining how you met Stella Corbin in Switzerland," I said. "In Lucerne," she said. "I could speak and read French, of course, and some German. I was terribly interested in Carl Jung. You know Carl Jung?" "Of course," I lied. I'd never heard of him either. "Well, Henry and Carl had been old colleagues," she went on. As she spoke, her eyes never left the cat. I felt we were getting nowhere, so I moved on to my second question. "What is it about Persian mysticism you find interesting?" "Oh," she exclaimed at that. "Henry showed us a whole missing third of the world, and the best third." I had no idea what she meant, but I did know it wouldn't make a quotable quote in the article I had to write about her. "It is imagination that has gone missing," she babbled on. "We think of the imagination as something amorphous and inconsequential, when in fact it is a very exact thing." Exactly. The cat, Esquire, strode with silent elegance across to her and then rubbed its whisker face on her lower legs. She looked down at its habits and gave it a light pat for mutual recognition. "I'm so glad he's back," she said again. "It's Henry Corbin's cat, you know," she added matter-of-factly. and since the cat's face had prompted her, she said next, "I have an old photograph of him somewhere." And another interruption. She made for a wooden box on the mantel and ruffled through some photographs. This Henry Corbin, educated in France, or was it Belgium, had gone to Persia, or was it Turkey, during the war, or was it a bit later, and immersed himself in old manuscripts. Good for him, I thought. Mrs. Greyland, a devotee, had written her book, or a few, about it all, but, I was thinking, she was living in the limelight of her own former times. It was probably new and exciting research on the sharp end of Persian studies once. Now she was definitely batty. Esquire, she was telling me, was Henry Corbin's cat. According to Wikipedia, Henry Corbin died in 1978. It was awkward. I had to envisage writing an innocuous article, a puff piece as they are called, short and sweet, and we would have a nice big picture of Mrs. Greyland holding a copy of her book to compensate for the lack of substance. It would fill a space on page 6. But discreetly I would need to avoid her senility and the sad fact that a woman of an astute mind had lost her grip. She was talkative, but she wasn't going to answer my questions. "Esquire has always been such a naughty cat," she said, "the way he comes and goes." Then she found the photograph she was looking for. "Here it is." I tried question number 3. "Why did you decide to write a book about Henry Corbin?" She looked at the photo, smiling, and reminisced. Then she handed it to me. It was an old monochrome print, standard size, glossy, faded, and I could immediately see a very young Mrs. Greyland standing there smiling for the camera. Beside her was a little man with a comb-over and a cigarette. Next to him was an attractive blonde woman with bobbed hair. "Henry and Stella," the old woman informed me. At the bottom of the photo, in cursive, was scrawled, "Lucerne, November 1973. At the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph, near the feet of the blonde woman, Stella, was a cat. It might have been tobacco-coloured, but it had a black eye patch, pirate-like, around its left eye, and in build and grace it did look for all the world like Esquire. It looked so much like the cat, in fact, that I was arrested there and had to look at it again. I admit, I know nothing about cats, breeds, bloodlines, nothing. But Mrs. Greyland was not entirely imagining things. The cat in the photo looks very much like the cat that had just walked in. This cat, Esquire, had meanwhile paced slowly past where I was sitting. It didn't look at me or approach for patting, but simply moved past. Then it went to its box in a corner, near to where Mrs. Greyland was sitting, and curled into place. It appeared settled and possibly ready to nap when I looked at it, then back at the cat in the photograph, then back at Esquire again. I had the 4th question ready. "Why have your publishers decided to bring out a new edition of your book at this time?" After having another look and feeling confounded, I handed the photograph back to her, and as she received it, she said, "You know, I have no idea. Publishers. Who can understand publishers?" And she laughed to herself. It was then, at that moment, that she, and then I, looked again at the cat box, and, incongruous of apparitions, the cat was gone, which is to say, disappeared. It most certainly didn't get up and leave the way it had come in. It didn't walk past me back to the door. It was in its box one minute, and the next minute it wasn't. It happened in the moment both the old lady and I were distracted by the handbag of the photo. In that flash, so it seemed, the cat was gone. Mrs. Greyland was suddenly upset, but I remembered what she had said. "Esquire, he comes and he goes." He had gone again, vaporised, into an imaginal puff. She turned to me, hostile, piercing sting in her old eyes. "He didn't like the smell of you," she spat. After that, as I struggled on robotically through my list of questions, she had decided to be far less forthcoming. The interview didn't go well.